Just briefly, one of the first tasks in this evaluation was to actually look at some of the key features of the operation of the court, because these are, to quote Nick Tilley, it's important to understand these mechanisms that are taking or have been put in place, and through which the Murray Court actually aims to achieve its objectives. They're listed there. I mean, I don't think there's really any sort of surprises amongst there. But they were sort of the key areas that we had to focus our evaluation on in terms of how they were actually contributing to positive outcomes. The other key part of our evaluation was looking actually at some of the issues relating to the operation of the court. The reason these are important is because these are what inform your recommendations when it comes to actually identifying areas in which the operation of the court could improve. The court was it was quite a resource-intensive court. It dealt with for an Indigenous court, it dealt with a very large number of offenders, both in adult and youth Murray courts. These offenders have extensive criminal histories. The adults had, through the offender profile, reported high levels of drug and alcohol abuse, unemployment, and actually a range of personal stressful events that they'd recently experienced prior to their offending. Similarly, juveniles had contact with school, family, dysfunction, and various other factors. I won't go through those too much further, other than to say that obviously what these factors were that's kind of key in informing our findings, but also our recommendations. Just briefly, I'll sort of outline the findings from the evaluation of the impact of the program, and obviously there's a quantitative and a qualitative component. The quantitative component looked at court appearance, imprisonment and reoffending, and the findings were mixed. We found that offenders appearing before a Murray court were more likely to attend court, both compared to prior to their appearances in a normal magistrates or children's court, but also compared to our comparison group. They were actually, despite the fact it was a jail diversion strategy, and this is where we encountered some resistance, they were no less likely to be sent to prison or, in the case of adults, because most of the juveniles actually weren't at risk of receiving a term of detention. And our initial result was actually that Murray Court participants were more likely to go to prison than non-Murray Court, and this obviously was a significant issue when we first released those findings to the court partners, obviously because it is a jail diversion strategy. But we actually worked through it, and we were actually able to identify why that was actually happening. And what it was a lot of the Murray Court participants were actually already sentenced to a term of imprisonment at the time of going to Murray Court. And what was happening in Murray Court is they were actually getting sentences that were non-custodial, but they actually provided for a greater opportunity for those offenders to participate in other programs sort of as part of their sentence. So those people who were not actually already serving a term of imprisonment were more likely to get community-based services, community-based orders, and other similar sentences, probation orders, that would actually enable them access to those programs. The other key component of the evaluation was the qualitative component, which looked at the relationship between the court and the community. Someone, I think, has already discussed the issue of community confidence in the court process, and this was actually one of the key findings in terms of the impact of the court, in that amongst both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, it had actually improved perceptions of the fairness of the court, confidence in court outcomes, collaboration between court partners had significantly improved, and real legitimate opportunities for Indigenous community representatives have been created to enable them to contribute to sentencing processes. We're actually in the process, as I said, of finalising the report, and I actually am somewhat reluctant, well, not reluctant, I'm actually been told not to discuss the recommendations so as to preempt any announcements. But there were 30 recommendations in our final report on, relating to various areas around how the court could actually be improved. And these actual recommendations have already been used by court staff and magistrates and various court partners to inform the establishment of new courts and development of other courts. So it was actually really positive to see our work actually being integrated back into policy and program development. I'm going to run out of time, so I won't cover this project in too much detail. Really, other to say then, we were, it was a collaborative project with ACT Police that was initiated by our board in response, obviously, to concerns around alcohol-related violence. The interesting part about this project is that we've actually worked closely with ACT Police to provide input into the development of their strategies, or we've tried to provide input. There's obviously some real world challenges that we've encountered, but it's been a real collaborative process where we've actually provided advice based on research and also some intelligence that we help them develop to kind of feed into their strategy development. And actually what's probably more important is that the findings from our evaluation will go on to inform their new liquor licensing team. Fortunate timing means that there's actually a new Liquor Act coming into place soon in the ACT, which is actually going to require a new policing response from ACT Police. And our findings will actually directly inform how they're going to operate with the new Act. I've listed there some important important lessons for evaluation. These are kind of my experience and also the collective experience of the people that I work with in crime reduction and review. I think most of them are fairly sort of self-evident, but I think the one that I've already highlighted, which is really important, is the issue of flexibility. The issue of making sure that the aims of a program are actually really well defined, so you know what you're measuring. The importance of, and again, it was something else that was measured, of not relying on a single measure of effectiveness. We found that, and I think I actually may have overlooked it, but the court didn't have any impact on reoffending. Now, obviously that's from the point of view of policymakers, that can be a negative outcome, but there are a range of other outcomes that the court generated in Murray Court that were actually positive and which were looked upon as being incredibly important. Now, crime prevention, again, is something that I didn't personally get a lot of exposure to when I was doing my degree, when I was studying, but it's something that I've obviously fallen into and worked for a number of years in, and I actually think it's a really important area. Not biased at all. One, because it's actually being recognised internationally now as a really important part of a national approach to building safe communities. It's not just about the criminal justice response, it's actually about that prevention focus. And I mean, there's obviously always that debate around law and order and prevention, and I don't know that prevention always wins, but I think there's increasing evidence to show that crime prevention can actually produce significant reductions. When it's well designed and well implemented, it can produce significant reductions in crime. It can help develop vibrant and safe communities, and it can reduce long-term costs associated with the criminal justice system, and other costs are social health and welfare. The AIC has, under Peter Hommel, who's actually had a fairly significant focus on crime prevention in recent years, and a number of collaborative projects with different jurisdictions. I've listed the kind of key ones there. They vary in that some of them are more evaluation focused projects than solely focusing on crime prevention, but there's two parts to our work. One of it is looking actually at the process of implementation and the operation of these crime prevention programs, and providing evaluation findings from the work that we do back to policymakers around how they can more effectively support local communities, particularly in delivering crime prevention. The other part is actually the capacity building side of things, where we actually provide high-level support and advice to our stakeholders. We also provide advice and research findings, and try and translate those research findings into practical lessons for practitioners, which include local government, police, various NGOs, community-based organisations.